All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to wait a minute or so to get started because we have some people still logging in. We will be right back. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Seamless End-to-End Integration of Your Donor Systems. My name is Kim Solman. I'll be your moderator, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. This webinar is brought to you by JMT Consulting. We are ERP and financial management solution specialists for nonprofits. We have nearly 30 years experience helping nonprofits with technology and business processes for the back office. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Scott Hollrah. Scott is the managing partner at Venn Technology and has built a reputation as a technologist and a problem solver. He helps nonprofits and small businesses be more effective through the use of Salesforce.com and integrated applications, as well as optimizing and automating business processes through the use of cloud-based applications. Scott graduated from Texas A&M University and has been married to his wife for 15 years. Together, they have 3 children and are active in their church, where they serve in small groups and the children's ministry. Before I hand it over to Scott, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, today's webinar will be recorded and will be emailed to you for on-demand access along with the slide deck. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question, please feel free to send it through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering all of your questions at the end of the session, but if we can't get to you, Scott will follow up with you via email. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Scott. Scott, over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So I am Scott Hollrah. I run a firm based in Dallas called Venn Technology. We've also just recently opened a second office in Washington, D.C. I'll also add that I am actually a former JMTer. I worked there for many years ago, and love the partnership that we still have today. So we're going to be talking a lot about integration, and we're mainly going to be focused on integration in the context of donor management flowing into accounting. But before we get into what that looks like, there's some things that I think are important to really think through before you take on an integration project. So we're going to kind of go through that first, and then we'll do a little demo here at the end. Before we get too far, would you guys just use the chat real quick and tell me what kind of applications are you using in your organization? Are you using Salesforce, Razor's Edge? Do you have a case management solution? What are some of those business critical applications? And again, if you'll just throw those in the chat, would love to see that. All right, we got a Razor's Edge. Nothing. Okay. All right. Well, we know at least one person's using Razor's Edge. The next question I'd like to pose, and actually we're going to throw up a little poll here. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well would you say that your systems are integrated? So your poll should have just popped up on your screen. If it'll take a minute. All right, let's see. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll. And okay, so we're down at the low end of the spectrum. We got a couple people saying they're a 1, one person saying they're a 2, a few people saying they're a 3. So this isn't uncommon, and I imagine that this presents a lot of challenges. I imagine that probably takes you longer to close your month. I imagine it probably means that a lot of people are having to manually key data across systems. And so, and in today's world, we use lots and lots and lots of applications. So, and we have solutions that are really good at doing these individual things. And today, we really expect that everything should work together. And so what we'll close with as we proceed through this, I want to leave you with a picture of what a fully seamless integration might look like, where we start off with a donor management system that accepts that gift online and passes not just the donation, but information about that donor on into your donor management. And then taking that the next step, getting it into finance. And maybe for some that are a little bit more sophisticated, maybe you use an internal messaging application like Slack, where you would want to alert people that you've received some major gift. And the good thing is these things are certainly possible. Maybe you're heavy in events. Maybe you put on conferences and you use something like Cvent, and you need to get that event pushed through your CRM and into finance. Again, these things are all very, very possible today. So we touched on this a minute ago. You know, why is this important? The manual processes are time consuming. It's error prone. I imagine that at some point we've all fat fingered something as we're typing on the keyboard, or maybe we've had a macro go bad on us and totally wreck our Excel file before we imported it. But not only do we have those challenges, we don't get timely insight into things. How are we tracking on our revenue, our expense? If any of you deal with any kind of inventory, you know, how are we doing? If we don't have that visibility across systems, that can lead to all kinds of problems. So what I want to do now is talk about some different ways we can go about integrating systems. And the first one up, no surprise, is the good old export import. If we could see everybody, I'd love to get a show of hands of how many of you are you know, going through that for your payroll. I would imagine that pretty much everybody here at some point has gone through this. On the plus side, this is a quote unquote free option. You know, it takes your time, but there's no cost to this. But on the downside, it can be time consuming. We've got to go through the formatting sometimes. We might have to do some transformation of our data. So for example, maybe the system your data is coming out of formats the date one way, and the system that it needs to go to, the date format needs to be different. We've also seen issues with duplication in this method. In fact, a few years ago, worked with a large nonprofit in Austin, Texas, who we had talked about a couple of different levels of integration, and they decided they just wanted to go the export route. And about a week after we had everything ready and they did their first couple of imports, we got a call saying, hey, we didn't realize it, but we had already exported the data for this date range, and now we have we've duplicated that data. So you know, there's a lot of cautions when we go with this export this export import option. The next type of integration, next method of integrating systems is what I refer to as a packaged integration. So, when you look at when you look at an application like Sage Intacct and you go out to their marketplace, you're going to find hundreds, if not thousands, of applications that have these packaged integrations, meaning it's kind of a plug and play. And these are great. They can be very fast to implement, and over time, if you're paying for that integration, you're typically getting updates to the integration. They're going to add functionality as time goes on. But on the downside, or something to be aware of, is that just because a packaged integration exists, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will do what you want it to do. And depending on how you might have customized other systems, those packaged integrations may not actually work with your customizations. This is something that we see a lot. And actually, just kind of speaking from our own experience, being a firm that focuses on Salesforce implementation, we use Salesforce internally, and we use MailChimp for our mass communications. I imagine many of you probably do too. There are some packaged integrations available for MailChimp, but we have some very, very specific things that we need to be able to do from a segmentation standpoint, the way that we create our lists. And while it's great that there is a utility out there, it doesn't meet our exact needs. The way that our data is structured, it just doesn't fit into that. And so one of the things that we recommend when you are considering a packaged integration is really lay out the workflow and do kind of a high level mapping of where data needs to be pulled from in the source system and where does it need to go to in the target system. And so here on the screen, we've got an example of Salesforce.com and Sage Intacct. So Intacct has published an integration for Salesforce, and this is kind of the high level workflow of what that does. In the nonprofit space, this concept of an order entry integration is not something that resonates with almost all the nonprofits that we work with. There's a handful that this works well with. But for many, this is not the workflow that they're trying to accomplish. And so laying this workflow out, I think, really helps to kind of figure out, is the package solution the right way for us to go? All right, the next option, and I think this is probably what comes to mind for a lot of people when they think integration, and that is custom code. Great thing about custom code is you can get exactly what you want, but on the downside, it's typically the most costly. We've got to pay software developers, and if we need to make changes, we don't have a lot of flexibility. And if we need to do something as simple as a basic field mapping, we might have to run through thousands of lines of code to find that one thing, and then we have to promote it up through multiple environments. So custom code is great if you have a large budget, but you might need to evaluate other options as well. The option that we tend to take is this last option that we'll talk about, and that is middleware. So middleware is software that sits in between other software applications, and it understands the APIs of the source systems and the target systems, and based on some trigger event, it is able to push the data through their pipe, so to speak. With the middleware approach, you get exactly what you want. You have the ability to string multiple applications together. It can be much quicker than implementing custom code, and we get a lot of flexibility. So I had a client a couple years ago who, kind of going back to that field mapping example, they added a new field that was replacing a field that had already been mapped. We got on a phone call, and in less than 15 minutes, we were able to go make that field mapping change, save it, and have them up and running with that change. Whereas if we had gone through the custom code route, that might have taken days or weeks to, get it into the development schedule, make the changes, run through all the tests, and then promote the code through multiple environments. So we get a lot of flexibility here. On the downside, we're not getting updates to that integration. If we want to go add something to the integration, we're not just going to inherit it. We're going to have to go build it, and then there is a cost to bringing in a middleware tool as well. Couple of other integration examples. I mentioned the ability to kind of string things together, and we talked at the beginning about how lots and lots of applications, we rely on lots of applications, and we need them all to work together. This is an integration that we built for one of our clients, or we co-built with them, where we are getting transactions in through multiple sources. They've got an e-commerce site. They use Shopify, and the extensibility that we're able to offer is pretty impressive. So when a new product comes up for sale on their e-commerce site, we might create that product in Intact, but we need that product to be available for sale in Shopify, and we need it available for reference in Salesforce. And so with the middleware approach, we're able to pass that product all the way through all three systems without anybody having to key anything. Same thing happens when somebody goes and places an order. That order is going to flow into the CRM, and then that transaction will flow all the way into the finance system as well. Another example, and this one is kind of a mix of different things. In this particular organization, they've got a packaged integration that feeds some data into Salesforce. They have some export type data, and then they have the automation going all the way into the accounting system. And so as we evaluate systems that need to be integrated, it may be that we use a combination of methods to accomplish the goal. So that's great, and I think that these are the kinds of things that we all dream of having in our organization, but we have to really take a number of things into consideration before we can start these integration projects. So we get phone calls every day where people will call us up and say, hey, we want an integration between X and Y, and we'll say, great. What does that look like for you? What does that mean? And they'll say, we want an integration between X and Y. And so I think for a lot of people that they have this kind of ethereal concept of having an integration, but they're not always able to articulate the specifics of what that integration needs to do. So from my perspective, we can't even begin down this path unless you can finish the sentence. When properly integrated, our systems will. And we've got a couple of examples here. So when properly integrated, our systems will sync all of our customer data across systems so that users can see full order and payment history in each application. That's very, very specific. Another example, we need our systems to provide access to summarized journal entries for all donations on a daily basis. So once we've kind of really honed in on what it is the integration needs to accomplish, we can take the next step. And oftentimes that next step revolves around process. When we get into our workshops and we're sitting in a conference room, if there are 5 people in the room, chances are we're going to have 5 different versions of how a process works in the organization. And it's always kind of fun, especially between development and finance, to hear the differing ideas of how things are done. So we've got to get everybody on the same page. If one person is doing something one way and another person is doing it a different way, the integration is going to melt down at some point. We've got to have that consistency. One of the other things that we have to think about is, where does the integration begin and end? I mentioned on one of the earlier slides that we really take a big picture view of integration. And oftentimes when people come to us and say, hey, can you build an integration between X and Y? One of our questions back to them is, okay, well, is there something that is there another system that comes before X? Is there something that's feeding into that system? And then I know you say that, you want the integration between X and Y, but is there something that comes after Y? So for example, and we'll get into this here, we do a lot of integration between Salesforce.com and Intact for nonprofits. And so the ask that we usually get is, can you help us build an integration between Salesforce and Intact? And what we have to do from there is say, yeah, we can do that, but what are the things that are feeding into Salesforce? Do you have a donor management system? Do you have multiple donor management systems? Do you have an event registration system that feeds in there? And then on the flip side, once we get the data into Intact, do you then need to put the data in a data warehouse so that you can run some advanced analytics on it? So we really have to think all the way through about where the process begins and ends. The next thing that we've got to think about is, when should the integration run? Oftentimes we implement scheduled integrations. So every night at midnight, we're going to go grab the donations out of the donor management system from the day before and push those into accounting. So scheduled is an option. We might have some other trigger event. So we talked about event registrations. When a new person registers for an event, is that our trigger to go push the data from point A to point B? Do we need to have some sort of review of the data before it gets pushed in? We've got a client who has a national office in the Dallas area with chapters all over the country, and the chapters are feeding data into one of their critical core systems, but finance doesn't want any of their data coming through until it's been reviewed. So again, really have to think through, when do we want this to run? How do we want this to run? All right, this one here is one of my favorites. We have to ask ourselves, what is the quality of our data? And it's important, because if we have problems with our data in the source system, we're now going to replicate that problem over in our target system. We've all heard the expression garbage in, garbage out, and in a lot of cases, the implications of that are around our reporting, and it's absolutely true with our reporting, but it applies even more so to integrations. We don't want to mess up multiple systems. So when we think about data and the quality of the data, the things that we're thinking through are, number one, do we have duplicates? In a system like Salesforce.com, if we have a duplicate account or a duplicate contact, we can go merge those and it's fine. But when we create a customer over in our accounting system, we don't have that same ability. And so we want to make sure that we get our data really, really clean before we build this. And so other areas that we look at is the accuracy of the data, and are we missing things? Do we have all the fields, critical fields that are populated? And then the next thing that we think about as it relates to data is having common IDs across different systems. So if you were to go do a GL import, and you put the GL code in your file, but that GL code doesn't exist in the accounting system, your import is going to fail. And so in these automated integrations, we've got to make sure that we've got common IDs across all the systems. So once we have really gone through all those considerations, then we can start to kind of realize the magic of what this integration might look like. And so to give you a little illustration, I am going to do a little demonstration. I have to stop my share for just a second. I'm having a problem getting my, there we go. So we talked earlier about the end-to-end nature of this integration, and we don't just need to integrate our donor management system with the accounting system, we need to take into account the fact that we've got some system feeding into donor management. So one of the applications that we work with on a fairly regular basis is an online fundraising tool called Raise Donors. And so what we're going to do here in Raise Donors is come in and we're going to create another, we're going to create a new fundraiser. So we will call this, we'll call this the new normal fundraiser, since that's something that we're all adjusting to. And there we go. So we've created this new fundraiser, and it's live. It's ready to go. We can start receiving funds. Now we talked about those common IDs a minute ago, and so one of the critical things is that we have a common identifier across all the systems for this. So we created a fundraiser in our online donation tool. We've now created a campaign in our CRM application. And getting back to that idea of extensibility, we have actually taken this all the way into our accounting system and created a project which is going to be critical for the coding of this. And in fact, if we hop back over here into the donor management system, we can see that it's successfully synced and other information about this campaign. So the next thing that we can do is, now that we've got our master data in place, we could actually process a donation. So here we're going to make a $50 donation, and here in just a few seconds, that donation will appear here in the donor management system. And going back to the idea of the data and keeping our data clean, one of the things you've got to factor for in your integrations is how are we going to keep the systems from duplicating data? When we build this type of integration, we often will put checks in place to see, for example, if we already have that donor in the system. If we do, we don't want to create a new version of the Jones family just for this one integration. We want to leverage that existing record so we can get that 360-degree view. So we can see now that that donation has processed, and if we actually go into the if we go into the donation itself, here's that $50 gift. We can see that it is tied to that campaign that we just created. So we've got all of our data intact. And then if we follow this all the way over into our accounting system, we will see that that donation here as well. And so we didn't have to touch anything. We didn't have the risk of that fat finger that we talked about earlier. And we also have timely insights. In this case, we're running this in real time. We have very timely insight into what's going on across all of these different systems. And so with that, hopefully I've left you with a picture of what is possible and things that you need to think through before taking on a project like this. I would love to open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Just as a reminder, there is a tab at the bottom that says Q&A where you can type in any questions for Scott to answer. Okay, I did have one come through. It says, how long does an integration project like this typically take?
That is an excellent question, and one that we get often. An integration project like this, it can vary, but on average, they take about 90 days. And we've got to really invest the time up front to really map out those processes and define the requirements. And then the other critical thing to making sure that this is successful is very thorough testing on the back end. And so we like to see our clients test for at least a week, if not 2 weeks, before we actually roll things out into the production systems. I think I saw
Great,
another.
thank you. We did have another question from Shelley. She says, what would you say are the first steps?
Yep, that's a great question. So the very first step is to get all of your stakeholders on the same page. So pull everybody into a room, or maybe a virtual room these days, and make sure that everybody's bought into the project and on the same page as everybody else about what this integration needs to accomplish. And so once you've kind of got those things mapped out, then go through the step of making sure that your data is clean. And then once you actually get the project underway, the next thing before you go live with it, again, is just that really thorough testing. Excellent question.
Thank you. And one more. Do you have any other organizations that are doing this currently?
Yes, many. In fact, we've done several dozen, I don't know, probably 30, 40 of this exact type integration, and no two of these projects are the same. There are, as you're probably well aware, there are all kinds of online fundraising tools out there that integrate with different systems. And so while the nature of the integration is very similar and there's commonalities, there's a lot of difference too. I think one of the follow-up items we'll be sending out after this is a case study on an integration like this that we did for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and the success that they've had with it. So yes, this is there are lots of these out in the wild.
Great, thank you. We will give it another 30 seconds or so and see if any other questions come in, and if not, we will wrap it up.
I think we got a quiet bunch today.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you all for joining JMT Consulting and Venn Technology for this webinar today. I would like to thank Scott for your time, and we hope you all enjoyed the presentation. We'd love for you to join us for future webinars. You can find them all listed on our website at jmtconsulting.com and click on our Training and Events tab. So this will conclude our webinar, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.